Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our today's webinar, ROI and OT Cybersecurity, Practical Insights into Achieving a Return on Investment. Here, joined today by Joe Weiss and Harry Thomas. Welcome, gentlemen. Glad you could be with us. Just love it if you could maybe introduce yourselves quickly, and then we'll get going. Maybe hand it to Joe first.
Number one, thank you to OTORIO for inviting me. I'm a control system engineer, got into cybersecurity from the operational side of the world, and have been involved in this for close to now 25 years. And I'm very active in standards committees, industry activities, and I've also done numerous assessments.
And Harry.
Hey, welcome everyone. I'm Harry Thomas. I am a OT security advisor here at OTORIO, but previously I've worked at a multitude of different OT cybersecurity startups and have more of an offensive cybersecurity background. So I was a hacker, penetration testing, red teaming, all of that.
Great, thank you. And once again, glad to have you with us today. My name is Dave Cullen. I'll be the facilitator today. And just a little bit of housekeeping for our attendees. Feel free at any time during the webinar to post questions in the Q&A section here in Zoom. And we'll have a Q&A session at the end of today's webinar and go through them. But let's jump right in. I think it's important when we start looking towards the topic of ROI to maybe start with some definitions. So would love to hear each of your definitions of ROI, OT, OT security. So maybe I'll start with Joe.
Okay, thank you. So to me, ROI, return on investment, means that, for example, you're using less fuel. You either reduced your maintenance costs, you're optimizing productivity. It's something that actually provides a real financial return for something you've actually, spent money on. And it's something that for years, even long before I got into cybersecurity, is what I was doing by optimizing control systems to be able to get a return on investment. In terms of OT, again, I'm going to give you my take. I'm not representing anybody else. This is just me. Number one, OT was a term coined by Gartner. Before they did that, there were really just two areas. You had IT and you had engineering. Today, in a sense, de facto, OT is really the control system network side. It is not the control system engineer, the relay engineer, the instrument engineer, the safety engineer, the manufacturing engineer. And so there really is a real difference. And the final one you asked about, what is OT security? OT security, again, is two things. Number one, it's securing the network. But number two, and more importantly, and what we're seeing right now in real life, is it's actually securing the process. And that's what makes it very different than quote unquote IT security, because it's independent of the network. Are you actually able to deliver water? Are you able to manufacture a product? Are you able to deliver electricity? That's what OT security should be about.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And Harry, what's your perspective on these definitions?
I agree with the majority of what Joe is stating. Some things that I have a little bit of deviation on is return on investment. I think that's coming into 2024, return on investment shouldn't just be talking about the financial bottom line. There is a return on investment on people, processes, technology. Think about a trying to upgrade a substation, right? You need a better backhaul back to your SCADA system. Well, cybersecurity might have initiated that conversation, the conversation, but the byproduct of all of that is that, you know, you have lower latency now out to the substation because you had to put in a fiber line. So I like to think about return on investment in broader terms, because if we only focus on the bottom line, the dollars, we're going to miss out on a lot of good things that good people are bringing to the table.
Yeah, for sure. I think we're seeing a much more dynamic landscape and growing awareness of security. But we'll be interested to get each of your view of kind of trends that we're seeing, you know, before we really dig into the topic. You know, what trends have you seen in 2023 when it comes to the topic of OT security and how that would relate to ROI? Maybe I'll pass that to Joe first.
Okay. Again, everything I'm going to talk about is quote unquote OT ICS cybersecurity, not talking IT or IT issues. There continues to be, even before the Unitronics issue, I've identified something like almost 30 or 40, I think close to 50 control system cyber incidents that have occurred just in 2023. A number of them have killed people. We now have the Unitronics issue, which is a nation state targeted cyber attack against control systems. And that's, you know, that's a big game changer. But the other thing too, in a sense, also that mirrors this session is there is becoming a bigger and bigger, instead of smaller and smaller, a bigger gap between the engineering organizations and the network security organizations. And I use the word network because it's both IT and OT. So the point being, instead of them coming together, they're actually getting farther apart.
Yeah, we certainly see that gap, you know, as we deploy technology and realize that this is fundamental now to successfully protecting these environments. Now, Harry, what are you seeing on this gap? Do you see it the same way? What are the trends that we've been seeing?
To comment on the gap that Joe was talking about, that kind of riff between network security and engineering, I do see it. We're all in the IT OT convergence. You know, we're already there, and what I'm seeing is there's a lot of finger pointing as far as who is responsible for what, rather than thinking like a cohesive team and collaborating and trying to bolster the cybersecurity, the networking, everything to protect these control systems so that we can have running water, so that we can have electricity. So those are the trends that I'm seeing. Additionally, kind of touching on the topic of what Joe was saying about these cyber attacks, we're seeing more crimes of opportunity. That's what I call ransomware. Ransomware type attacks are crimes of opportunity. But to talk about kind of what Joe was speaking towards is now we're having much more targeted attacks as well, coordinated, well thought out, right? We're no longer in the times of, well, you know, Windows 7 just patch. We have to start thinking about more of what I like to call like a defensible architecture. And that's where you need to bring both sides of the party together in order to build that architecture.
Right. I think defensible architecture is a great term, and it's crucial. I agree. Now, the challenge is some might just see that as cost. Do we really believe that cybersecurity, and Joe, love your kind of insight into this. Do we really believe that cybersecurity can increase productivity, that it can drive true ROI in the organization, in the industrial organization or critical infrastructure. How do you see it?
Okay, number one, there are at least a couple of documented cases. Ironically, one of them is actually OTORIO. But there are a couple of documented cases where I can show that it isn't necessarily cybersecurity that drove the ROI, but addressing cybersecurity and doing it, quote unquote, in a engineering type fashion has actually directly resulted in real ROI. The first case was, and there's a phenomenal amount of things that are coming out of this. This was basically $1 billion manufacturing facility. And what they were worried about, the plant was worried about productivity, had nothing to do with cybersecurity. And so they did a project dealing with, could we trust, if you will, the sensor input to the Windows HMIs, et cetera, because everything looked normal. Well, when they started looking at, if you will, the raw sensor readings, in other words, the real physics of the process, what they were able to find is, after looking at that and looking at the operability of the main feed pumps, this plant, $1 billion plant, was taking a 3% hit on net productivity. This is a $1 billion facility. This is real money. And the point being, this is the engineering view of cybersecurity. It was doing productivity with cybersecurity coming along for the ride, because this is actually the real, can you trust what the networks are even telling you? The other one is, and this is really pointing toward OTORIO. And it's also some of the work that's recently I was actually having to vote on in my position at ISA on the Standards and Practices Board. We were voting on a standard dealing with alarm management. Now, this was alarm management for equipment. But if you think about the networks, you've got even a bigger alarm management problem. I mean, we've got tens or hundreds, maybe, of alarms that we're dealing with. They all occur at the wrong time, but that we're dealing with. You've got millions of hits coming constantly. And the project that I looked at was, you were able to, in a sense, minimize that real impact of these alarm management storms. And that's a real ROI. So here are two different cases. The issue is, can you do it? But in both cases, I think the key is, it wasn't really being done for cybersecurity's sake. It was being done for other reasons. And cybersecurity, in a sense, came along for the ride, and everything was better because of it.
Oh, I think that's a good point. And so many times we tend to look at cybersecurity in this context of downtime, loss of business, because we look at solely that if an event were to happen, the production line will be down. Very important. But when we really look at gaining true ROI, it's the ability to operationalize technology, and for the technology to be seamless with the operational process. In other words, at the very least, it shouldn't detract from the process. But if we can find ways to enhance the process, even better. But we have to be careful not to limit the thinking to catastrophic event where there's lost time. That is important, but ROI is truly found in figuring out the reliability and productivity of day-to-day operations. So I think it then makes us look towards a new challenge. Is at least from our experience, we see that CISOs more and more are being tasked with the responsibility of, or dare I say it, owning the risk for OT security, and they're getting a, you know, kind of that quote unquote seat at the table. But Harry, do you think do they have the knowledge and the tools kind of to show to gain the insights they need, and then show and demonstrate that they're contributing to the business goals of the organization?
That's a good question. I don't think CISOs have all the knowledge they need or the tools to be able to accurately depict cybersecurity between IT and OT and ensuring that the right conversations are being had at the executive table. Yeah.
And how do we start working towards you know, gaining that capability and that insight, that expertise?
I like to take it from take a step back, right? Let's not just throw technology and money and tools at everything to try and understand an organizational risk. I believe that the CISO and the cybersecurity team should be able to analyze the entire organization's risk, right? Because more often than not, if OT were to be hacked for any reason, they have to go through IT a majority of the time. I'm not, you know, there's sometimes modems out there that shouldn't be out there in the OT network. But once you analyze the risk of the entire organization, then you can almost create like a matrix of what you have currently from a tool perspective and map that to some sort of framework, like MITRE, MITRE for ICS and MITRE for enterprise, and ensuring that, hey, you know, for certain aspects of this framework, do we have a tool, technology, people, processes in order to make sure that we are defending ourselves? And that will help build that defensible architecture, but additionally, that'll help justify and prioritize what you need to do next.
Yeah, for sure. Now, Joe, do you have, I guess, what are some practical steps organizations can kind of start to, you know, take and shift the perspective on OT security as we've kind of discussed it today?
Let me start with, in a funny sense, a response to the question you just asked, Harry. And this also explains why we have such a problem today. The owner of the turbine is not the CISO. The owner of the transformer, or the owner of the distillation column, or the owner of the pipeline is not the CISO. Yet that person, that VP of power production or power delivery or pipelines or manufacturing, is very often not at that table and not in that boardroom when the discussions are occurring on their equipment. If that turbine is damaged, it doesn't matter for why. The CISO has absolutely no responsibility. And there have been instances where it's the cybersecurity technology or testing that has actually caused harm to these systems. Now, that has to be, you know, when obviously engineering and network security have to work together. Right now, it's not working. I remember when we started the EPRI program in 2000, now almost 24 years ago, we said donut diplomacy should occur. In other words, the engineers should take the IT people out for donuts and coffee or vice versa. And you would think this problem should have gone away 24 years ago. You know, the people who haven't been in any of our conferences in general are the psychologists. Why in the world can we not work together? And part of that, I believe, is each side has different needs and metrics. I want to just give one example. I gave a presentation at a local meeting, and a utilities cybersecurity person was there. He came to hear me. We went to lunch after. And I asked him, if there was an event that the only way you could keep the lights on, remember, this is a utility. The only way you could keep the lights on is to open up the firewall. Would you do it? You know what the answer was? No. Why? Because the cybersecurity organization doesn't have the same metrics. They have no metrics for, the reliability, for example, if you're talking electric, of the grid. None. Doesn't matter if there's, reliability outages or not. The converse is the engineers have absolutely no metrics for how much, I won't say downtime because downtime hits them, but how much impact has cyber done to your systems? And when neither side has metrics that forces them to work with the other, you're not going to get anywhere. And this is where we are today. We've got to have the cyber organizations have some level of responsibility for the reliability of the systems. We need the engineering organizations to have some, measure of responsibility for the cybersecurity of their systems. And until we can get that, and it's not 50-50, it could easily be 90-10, but there has to be some real KPI that forces each of them to have to work together. And there aren't a lot of organizations that do that today.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we tend to treat this as a technology first type of problem and very quickly realize it's not, right? It is people and process, and that there is ROI, there is true ROI in getting the people and process angles kind of addressed. And you're right, Joe, there is still a large gap. There's not enough unifying language. There's not enough bringing people together. And OTORIO, we often talk about risk being that unifying language. Regardless, it's to know the identity of the organization and to be able to establish those metrics that kind of both disciplines can buy into. And until that happens, there isn't much that's really that proverbial North Star to guide progress, right? So I it's a stark reminder, and I thank you for that. And I think we've seen how the differences today, even in how we're discussing this, that we need to bring these differences around the table, acknowledge that it's not a bad thing that there's differences. I mean, we have a great opportunity to learn from each other and to learn from experiences and perspectives. So I think, I don't want to end on doom and gloom, but I would love, to get both your perspective on what's 2024 going to bring us? Where do we need to focus to really, bring this concept of ROI kind of into the forefront? Harry, what do you think for 2024?
Let me think on that. Go to Joe first. I have a good
Okay.
answer. It's not fully formed yet.
Okay, we'll go to Joe first.
Okay, I want to go back to the project that I mentioned before, where there was that 3% hit on net productivity, because it represents exactly what our issue is. This project was called productivity. Because it was called productivity, corporate was involved, plant management was involved, the entire plant staff was involved, and cyber was involved. If you would have called that project cybersecurity, you would have had no participation from corporate, from plant management, for anybody else. Okay. Now, the net result helped everybody. Now, the reason I'm going, when you ask about 2024, I wanted to repeat that one, but I also wanted to point out one other thing. And that's this whole unitronics issue. Because I want to go through what those unique issues are and why that's going to have such a big effect moving forward. This was, like I say, number one, it's nation state. It was not aimed at any one user. It was aimed at specific equipment, in this case, equipment that came from Israel. They did not care who used it. Okay. They only cared, or let me rephrase it. They didn't care who the user was. They only cared that they used it. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up, and again, think moving forward, Iran, and this is Iran, there was just a CISO report on Friday that said this is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. That's who's behind this. This isn't just some whatever isolated hackers. The point being that Iran not only does not like Israel, Iran doesn't like anybody who provides, products or services to Israel. You look at all of the major control system suppliers. They all supply control systems to Israel. Does that mean each and every one of our control system suppliers are next on that list? This is not a one-off. This is a new type of threat. Maybe not really new, but what's out there now. And I fully believe this is going to be a very big issue. And moving into 24. But also, again, part of the point is this. The response that CISA, I just put a blog out on this literally yesterday. The response that CISA gave on what to do about unitronics was totally off course. And the reason is we're talking about a PLC, a programmable logic controller. We're not talking about a Windows device. We're not talking about a firewall or whatever. The guidance of what to do was entirely IT focused. But what's more than that, because there was no real knowledge coming from the engineering side, the ability to even meet those recommendations are problematic at best because technologically, control systems can't do what quote unquote modern IT systems can do. And so as we're driving, even when we had our little dry run before, this thing really hadn't hit, but it's hit now. And this is going to push us because I can't speak for what's happening in IT in 2024, but it's pretty evident that we're looking at real attacks going after controllers and more than that, and not necessarily just through IT means or IT networks. So that's my take on what's happening.
Harry, coming back to you, any thoughts as we move to Q&A?
Yeah. Thank you for giving me a moment to think. I think in 2024, what we're really going to be doing is worrying about what I keep saying, defensible architecture, ensuring that what we have, if there were to be an attacker or threats, would we be able to identify, detect, respond, recover, your whole NIST cybersecurity framework. I believe that more organizations are going to be focusing on the whole realm of that cybersecurity framework and not just detection or identifying our assets. I think we're going to be beyond that based off of some what Joe was bringing up about attacks on PLCs and such, where we now need to bolster our defenses around our crown jewels.
Mm-hmm. No, I think the need is clear and the threat is real, and we're seeing this accelerate. We're seeing this being more prevalent each and every day, and certainly I would say that this is a different conversation than we were having even a year ago. Even though a lot of the conditions, the controllers are still the same controllers that existed a year ago, but the threat landscape around them is changing rapidly. So I think we need to acknowledge that, because really being able to deploy that defensible architecture, we're going to see our ROI from that. Many organizations, just at least from my experience, is they focus heavily and they get through the protection and detection and that capability, but they don't look at their operational resilience. They don't bring these disciplines we're talking about that are distinctly separate, engineering and OT security. They don't bring them together to really look at it from an operational resilience perspective. So before we move to Q&A, I think that's the message I have as we close, is really focus on operational resilience and being able to have your people participate in that, bring up the knowledge of your teams, have collaboration. Maybe we do need to get back to more coffees and donuts, being consumed with these teams. Whatever it is, each organization kind of has to look for what works for you to kind of bring these people together. So I really appreciate the perspective and the answers today. We do have some questions that come in via the Q&A. So I'd love to kind of ask a few of these before we close. So I think we'll go to Joe first. And what role, in all this that we've talked about, what role do you believe the OEMs play? I think you just mentioned that controllers don't really have security built in, but what role do you believe the OEM needs to play?
The OEM is the one who basically furnishes the equipment. So they not only furnish the equipment, which may or may not have security in it, which is what we're dealing with, they're also the ones that have to help us with the compensating controls needed to work around the fact that they don't have security. And I want to give you a different take also about the vendors. And this is not a knock, it's just a fact of life. It turns out that, just like every other organization, a major vendor has two aspects. They have the engineering part where you design and build, say, a pump, a motor, a valve. You have the cybersecurity organization that's trying to make sure all of the communications are secure. Well, it turns out in many vendors, I won't use the word most or all, but I'm certainly going to say many, the engineering organizations and the cybersecurity organizations are not connected. I had put out a blog that some of our biggest vendors in their 2023 specification list for process sensors have no cybersecurity, no authentication, anything. And yet all of them have remote access. Now, these are the same vendors who are part of ISA's Global Cybersecurity Alliance, telling the world they're leading the world in cybersecurity. So the point being, our vendors are critical. I mean, they provide the equipment. What we have to figure out, and by the way, the other point is, this equipment is going to be used for 10, 15, 20 years. It will not be replaced, and I'm with very, very, very high confidence. It will not be replaced because of cybersecurity considerations. It will be replaced because of obsolescence or other regulatory type issues, which means we have to figure out what to do with that equipment. Not only legacy, but new equipment. I told you, here's the 2023 spec sheet. There is no cybersecurity in their 2023 spec sheets. This is not old stuff. So the point being, yeah, vendors are important.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, I see, coming from the utility industry, I saw it to where the regulator makes the assumption that this is a 30-year asset and the useful life is 30 years. And it shall, you can't rip and replace at year 10 without regulatory impact. So along with that line, though, Harry, I would love you to answer this next question, which is what is your perspective on regulations? Do they help or hinder building an effective security program?
Regulations, for the most part, help kind of drive, right? Start the conversations, because you have something from a regulatory body. Now you have to start having the conversations around it. It's up to the individual organization to say, hey, we met the regulation. Are we done? Or we met the regulation and we're going to exceed it because based off of, these other types of cybersecurity frameworks, we're going to need to go above and beyond to build that defensible architecture, and that probably is a gap in regulatory bodies, in regulations that isn't always identified. Here's a start. Now we have to go and bring it to the next level.
Agreed. They often are reactive as well. The regulation is put in place in response to something that's already happened, and so we need to keep that in perspective as well. Is that it is a baseline, perhaps a good foundation to build on, but you should extend beyond it.
Dave, can I mention
you
one
bet.
thing? Regulations are normally compliance-based. One of the issues we have in the control system world, our control systems are system of systems. And quite often, there will be parts of those systems that don't fall into the compliance category. It is a very difficult thing to do, to come up with appropriate regulations for control systems. It's just that simple. So I just want to lay that out. It's not always that simple, and you may meet regulations and still not be safe or secure.
Very true. No, you're exactly right, Joe. And I think it needs to be looked at as one part, right? And there's more to it for sure. But when it comes to manage risk, another question for you, Joe, is what's your perspective on insurance? Does insurance have a role to play here?
Very much so. And in fact, I want to take you back to before I ever got into security, when I was just dealing with, control systems, etc. And it turns out that there's a thing called reliability-centered maintenance. It basically says you're going to do predictive monitoring to determine when the equipment is going to start going bad. So you're, shut down, repair, replace, whatever. All right. And so you have maybe a $5 million turbine outage rather than a $50 million turbine replacement. And the point being, the insurance companies came to the end users and said, if you have a predictive maintenance program, reliability-centered maintenance program, this is the things I was doing. The insurance company said, we'll give you a break on your premiums. There was a carrot and stick. I've been having conversations with the insurance companies. Shouldn't we be doing the same thing for cybersecurity? So that's, if you will, the carrot side. Now there's a stick side, and it goes back to what you brought up about risk. Credit rating agencies and insurance companies are entirely focused on risk. And they're also focused on the fact, are you doing enough to reduce that risk? Because there's only so much risk I'm willing to accept. So part of this is saying, and this is also part of what that big project that I mentioned before did, is the monitoring of that system. I'm not trying to, and I'm not mentioning any names, I'm just talking about technologically, okay? If you can know what is happening with your systems and you are not connected to the OT networks or the IT networks in doing this, that means IT malware and ransomware can't even get to you. And you don't even have this issue of, gee, do I shut down under an abundance of caution because I don't know what's going on? These are some of the thoughts now going on in the insurance industry. So they are, in a funny sense, proactively looking forward. The end users, and by the way, that also includes the vendors, because the vendors are actually a manufacturer unto themselves. They're an end user too. They need to very much themselves ask, are we helping, or, what does that mean to insurance? And what does that mean to risk?
Yeah. It's a discipline that accelerates very fast, and it is a complex issue, because what we know today isn't what might be the reality tomorrow, right? So we need to be trying to predict the future, while meeting the needs of today, and operating safely, reliably, and focusing on productivity. So I think it's a dynamic challenge, right? That we need to continuously address, because things, whether for right or wrong, things are becoming more connected, and I think we need to be able to, address that as safely as we can, right? So great. So these are the questions we've had for today. Just going to put up our email address, because we're happy. Feel free, anybody who's, any attendees, or maybe somebody who's listening to the recording, if you have more questions and you would love feedback, we would love to hear from you. So just putting it up on the screen now. If you email us at info@otorio.com, today's attendees will be more than happy to chime in with responses and to continue dialogue. And I just want to say, Joe, Harry, a lot of thank yous for today. This was a great discussion, and really, I hope what everybody can see is there are many different perspectives, again, that provide value, and that we need to, as practitioners, be continuing to collaborate and really look for those opportunities to better protect these environments, to address risk, and to again, back to your initial point, Joe, really focus on productivity, because that's really where the true ROI is. So again, thank you for your participation today, and thank you those who attended. And we look forward to seeing everyone on future webinars. Thank you.